joining us today for another episode of What's Your Why Wednesday. Today, I am joined by the amazing Sasha Stair. She is the Senior Director of Customer Success at Snapdocs, as well as the author of the best-selling book, The Inside Job, Master the World Within to Lead the Future of Corporate. Sasha, thank you so much for joining us today. Sasha and I have never physically met each other, but we know each other from social media. And after following her, I knew I had to invite her to share her why. So Sasha, we all have our journeys in life. And I've realized that our why is really the fuel of everything that we do, whether it's personal or business. And at this time, Sasha, I would love to hear, what is your why?
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for having me on. And I'm so happy that we connected and love the podcast, love the question. I think on the similar vein of what you said, our why evolves over time. But I have this sneaking suspicion in theory, I'm almost 40, I'll be 40 next year, that it stays rooted in some sort of motivation that's consistent across your journey of life. And as I peel back the layers of my why, what I have discovered it to really be is a deep rooted desire to create positive change in the world. And that comes about in many different ways. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call and I was not expecting that curveball in the middle of the podcast. Hopefully it didn't interrupt. So I think, it helps to understand the journey of how I came to that. And in my early 20s, I think most people in their early 20s were probably doing the same thing. I was very self-focused, but a lot of that discovery would ultimately come back to fruition on my why. And at the time, I was male-dominated industry, selling medical devices, and I really just felt like it didn't fit the mold. And I figured, okay, well, I could keep trying to fit the mold, or I could just figure out what works for me. And so I ended up figuring that out and ultimately coaching a lot of other women in sales on how to sell more authentically. And it didn't necessarily mean that you couldn't take on some of those masculine traits. I have a lot of them. But I think there were a lot of feminine traits that I was just completely ignoring that really helped me uncover and unveil what I could do. And as I continued to evolve in my journey, I ended up in the nonprofit world. I've been in a lot of different industries, a lot of different roles. And the nonprofit that I ended up running was to prevent sexual violence. And as I was diving into that industry, I think I started to realize, okay, here's a theme, right? Like I want to create positive change, but if I'm going to do that, I need to start figuring out how to do it at scale. And when we were working on research around sexual violence, what we ultimately found was the reason that people usually act in a violent manner, whether it's against themselves or another, is because they lack the skills at a younger age to process their emotions in a healthy way. And so the programs we ultimately developed were really focused on helping teach those skills. And you could call them human skills, right? Emotional intelligence, understanding where your emotions come from, where you body them, how you move through them and process them, along with some other human skills, self-awareness, being able to handle failure in a more graceful manner, et cetera. And ultimately, our programs ended up helping prevent not just sexual violence, but things like bullying and cutting and suicide and all sorts of violence, whether against yourself or another. And so in the latter half of my career, I've been in housing, and I think it's evolved now into like, okay, how do I scale it even further, right? And what I've come across, and across all industries, but maybe arguably worse in housing, unfortunately, is what I would call not great leadership, a lot of lack of culture, and a lot of lack of like mentorship and really investing in people. And I kept going like, what is going on? And like, why does this happen? And I think ultimately that's what drove me to write the book, The Inside Job, is I really wanted to create a guide that could work for anyone, but it's very much geared towards people in corporate, whether housing or otherwise, to hone in on how you, again, go back to those human skills, right? Like be self-reflective, look within, take a hard look in the mirror, and it's okay to be where you are and to take that snapshot and ultimately decide, okay, what am I going to do from here? Am I going to stay in victim mode? Or am I going to empower myself to make changes that start from within so that I can create change outside of me as well? And ultimately, again, like how do you create positive change at scale, I thought, okay, that book will hopefully reach more people, ultimately through podcasts and other mechanisms, continue to reach more people. And so again, just coming back to that root of, I think looking back, the why is really a desire to create positive change in the world, and the how happens in all these different examples I've given.
Right. Wow. So there's a lot there. There was a lot to unpack of that, as they say. All right. So one, I love, let's start at the beginning of one of the first things you said is that you started out in the male dominated industry, right? And you're still in a male dominated industry, even though it's changed there, right? And one thing that I've seen with that is that so many times, especially when we're young and we come into an industry, we start to mirror who has been here before us, right? And when you jump into a male-dominated industry as a woman, you start to mirror what you're seeing in terms of who is progressing and how they're progressing. So going back to that first part of what you were speaking about, in regards to the reason why we kind of push down some of our feminine side is because a lot of times we don't see that gets us in forward motion into the positions that we're looking for, right? Now, just like you just said, and I'll be the one to say it too, the beauty of this is that it's a balance between feminine and masculine, and it has no difference of what gender you are. It absolutely makes no difference, right? We need a balance between, there are certain times we have to call on our masculine side. It's not appropriate for us to use our feminine side, and vice versa. There are many times when we have to call on our feminine side. So I love that you recognize that and kind of said, okay, I'm aware of this, and then I make those changes. The nonprofit, wow, that is just mind blowing. And something was kind of playing in my brain as you were saying it, that it's the responsibility of the most self-aware person to actually make that change. So that self-awareness is so important. And it's something that sometimes people are afraid of what they see in that mirror. And that's the reason why they kind of, look away and they don't look at themselves. It's easier to look at someone else and kind of say, it's because this person said this, did this, held me back, did whatever that situation is. It's much easier to do that in that victim mode, like you said, instead of empowering ourselves and being self-aware. So then from you to say, I'm going to take action. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I've written books also. It is a journey. It is not an easy thing. It is absolutely something that many times you're like, yeah, I don't know if I can finish this. It's a great idea that I started this, but so the fact that you took action and you said, I'm going to take what I've seen and I'm going to apply it and put a guide out so that I can help others to make that positive change. So many things there, Sasha. I mean, I commend you on recognizing your why, because I will tell you, and it's funny, I just said this a few moments ago. I was on a webinar and I said that at this moment right now, this is my 91st episode of What's Your Why, right? So I'm because I was counting it because I'm like, I know I'm getting close to 100. And I've heard so many different stories. And a lot of people don't know their why. They actually have said, until you asked me to share it, I wasn't really sure what my why was. Now, of course, people say my family, my children, all that, but it's more than that. And you are very fortunate that you are clear on what that why is. And although it will evolve, it will continue to evolve, you are clear in ultimately making positive change in the world. And I'm confident, I know that you're just getting started. That's wonderful. All right, awesome. Next question. Okay, you identified this why. You have made all of this forward motion throughout your life so far, right? I really want to hear, give me a story of when you realized an impact that you've made in the decisions and the things that you've done this far. Give me one of those parts heartfelt stories?
Yeah, I think it's another great question. And also thank you for acknowledging everything that you did in my story. And to answer this one, it actually is still connected, which should not be surprising, to the book and my writing. And in, I think, the fall of 2019, we were going through, it was a different organization at the time, and we were going through a lot of changes. And I really felt like my team was struggling to embrace those changes. I recently read The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, and I can't stop talking about it. It's such a fantastic book. But the theme behind it is seeing the obstacle as the opportunity. And so I kept feeling like I want to motivate my team to see change as an opportunity, right? And to embrace it and to recognize that the one constant in this world is change. So better get used to it now and start to learn how to adapt and how to evolve in an ever-changing environment. And I also wanted to create a sense of culture because I felt we were lacking it because we were going through so much change. And a lot of it was at the leadership level, and new leadership hadn't had a chance to come in and imprint that. So I started writing what was really just an email to my team, and I called it like a Monday newsletter. And ultimately, I started it with a quote and a shared story about that quote. And then I would go into things that they should know that are going on in the organization that week, or things I had heard from leadership meetings, et cetera. And eventually someone said, hey, you should really put like this first part on LinkedIn and turn it into a newsletter. And I thought, that's an interesting concept. And so I did it. And who would have thought that I didn't know COVID was coming? None of us knew, right? Ultimately, being in that environment, we were going to need more connection, more culture, more, human factor than ever. And so when I published that newsletter on LinkedIn, and ultimately have been doing so ever since, every Monday, I titled it The Monday Magic. I thought that's a fun play on alliteration and words. And I ultimately felt like it actually happened before I wrote the book. I just published the book actually a year ago, almost today, November 11th is when I published it last year. And so the newsletter came first. So it was almost like my preview into what would ultimately become the theme behind the inside job. But it was meant to really start your Monday off right? Like take your Monday back, but ultimately inspire leaders on their personal and professional growth journeys to really look within. And I had no idea at the time how impactful it would be until I started getting email after email after email after LinkedIn message after LinkedIn message saying, I really needed this message this week. Thank you so much. And then the stories that would unfold, going through a really hard divorce and your words meant so much to me, or just lost my wife to cancer, right? And like needed this right now to help put it in perspective. I mean, it like gives me chills even now feeling that. And who would have ever thought? I mean, I've been in ops, I've been in tech, I've been in sales. Here I am thinking like the gifts I'm going to bring to the world, it's got to be somewhere in there. Had no idea that just by sharing my truth, being transparent, creating deep connection with humans was going to ultimately be that key. And it does translate across industries. But I think when it comes to me staying with housing, which I anticipate I will at this stage, we'll find out. But I've been here for almost 10 years. And I feel like once you're in, that long,
it kind of
probably in it for long haul. It does. But I had no idea that would ultimately be the thing that I would look back on and go, wow, I think that's the inflection point where I really realize what I bring to the world, to the industry, wherever I am, and how I'm going to be in service as a leader. And it just, I can't describe anything more profound than that. And it's ultimately, again, why I wrote the book, so I could scale those messages.
I love that. And it's so funny. I'm of the similar thing that I started these Monday motivational videos September of 19, just like you, like very similar time. Again,
oh my gosh,
not knowing,
not a coincidence,
about COVID, not knowing what was coming, not knowing all of that, and exactly the same experience. And it's funny that, to your point, I've been in mortgage my entire life, and all of that. And who would think that the biggest connection didn't come from my accomplishments as an executive, which of course that has a big reach, but the connection, the human connection comes from sharing a piece of ourselves, to your point, whether it's a piece of our mind, whether it's a piece of our heart and our soul. So I agree with you so much. And it's something that I hope people are listening to this to realize that the beauty of all of this is that no two people are alike. So what Sasha has to share is different than what Laura has to share, and different than what Bob has to share, and Sue has to share, and everyone out there. So no matter what you see, so many times I hear people say, well, I can't write a book, or I can't do a blog, or I can't do a podcast, or a whatever it is. Actually, you can, because your message and your experiences and your perspective is going to be different than everyone else. And you don't know who out there needs to hear it. Because that, to your point about the person that's going through the divorce or the difficult medical diagnosis or a loss, grief, something, a loss of a job. I mean, look what's happening in our industry, right now, people struggling with that. So do it. And do it because maybe it's that one person. Maybe it's that 100 people. Enough. Who knows, right? But it could be just one. And that's enough.
It is enough.
Thank you
for
doing it. Yes.
Oh, you're so welcome. When I ran the nonprofit Jeans for Justice, we had this saying of, and I'm sure someone else created it, but we used it a lot. When you make one ripple in the water, that's how the ripples expand, right? So one life is enough. That's all that matters. And that's where you start.
Yes, that is right. I love this story. And now you look forward to it, right? Now you probably are excited to do that every week, right?
I am. I love it. And it always flows, even when I'm exhausted or sick. I have given myself probably like 2 breaks in those. I don't even know how many years that is now, 3 years. But ultimately, I usually stick to that every Monday. But even when I'm tired or sick, the words still flow. And I'm like, that has to be destiny, right? And fate. But like, this is part of my purpose of being here, part of my why. If it comes so naturally and so easily, and it creates such a profound impact, I mean, how could that not point to a North Star?
Yeah, it's actually funny you explained it like that, because it's almost like sometimes it's an out-of-body experience where it flows through you. Like that's what it sounds like you're describing. Yeah. And I can relate to that, because sometimes like, oh, I don't even know what, and then it just comes. It just comes to us, and it will come to you, whoever you are. It will come to you when it's right. It absolutely will. All right. So I have two more questions. One, what's on the horizon? I want to actually know what's on the horizon for you. What other projects are you working on?
Oh man, I really want to write more books. I have so many ideas on what those are. The first book that I wrote was about looking within so that you could create change without. So I've thought about the potential of making it a series, and the next would be how do you extend that to teams and finally to organizations. I've also thought about, because everyone constantly asks me, like, how do you take all the things that you do and like put it into one theme or one word or one phrase, and then, turn that into something that you can teach to everyone. And I'm like, I don't even know what it is. And so I'm leaning into that one a little bit right now as well. Maybe that becomes a book, but meanwhile, just continuing to practice what I preach, right? For myself, for my teams, for our organization, for our clients, for this industry, especially to what you mentioned earlier, right? We're going through a really challenging time right now. And I think people need this work more than ever. And so as much as I can lean into it while still doing my job, and they go hand in hand, but of course there are the day-to-day operational things that you've got to get done, the better. And so I'm just continuing to lean into that. And then hopefully another book will be coming out of me soon.
Awesome. Okay. We are going through some of that adaptability and some of that change right now in this season in the mortgage and real estate world. So I'd love to hear your advice. You said you've been doing this for about 10 years. Okay. There are some people in our industry right now that this is their first cycle of change. This is the first time that they're experiencing this need for adaptability. What would be your piece of advice to them?
So a few things. One, lean in, right? Especially the things that scare you, and see that obstacle as the way, as the opportunity. What I know to be true is the housing industry is here to stay. It's never gone anywhere. I don't think it ever will. And that people who are in this industry for the long haul are the ones that when times get tough and we go through these cycles and rhythms that we're used to, albeit this one is definitely an odd one, that we dig in and we stand in the trenches together and we get closer and we support each other through it. And on the other side of it, we celebrate together. And again, it comes back to people and the human factor. And that is what drives this industry. And if you have any desire to be inspired by that, this is a great place to build a home. But you've got to get really uncomfortable with the messy, with those stormy weathers and the times that we're in right now. And it requires us to have a lot of grit. But what I love so much about this industry is the resiliency of the people. I mean, it's just fascinating to watch it happen. And I know I should say my father was in the building industry. So as a kid, I grew up going to all like the Building Industry Association installation dinners for the board and all that kind of stuff. So I've been around it enough to see it, even though I haven't worked in it my entire career. And I can't say more to that concept of like the people are just going to be in it together. And if you want to be one of those people, I think you'll be inspired and you'll get it when you come out the other side. But right now it requires you to lean in and face the fear and do it anyway.
I totally agree. And you are correct. We are in this together. Do not look at people as competitors. We are one industry. We understand. My best relationships are within this industry. Never, ever be afraid to reach out to someone, to make a true connection, an actual true connection. When we learn and we understand each other, I promise you that you will grow. You will grow your network. You will learn from them. You will expand. And those people will more than likely get you through these types of cycles. So great advice, Sasha. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. It has been absolutely amazing. And we wish you all the best always.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate you having me.